Prudence Sowerby was given the cracked blue plate again. There were 30 guests that night at Ravensmere Hall. 30, they ate off Thorne's silver, the good service, the plates with the gold rim that came out only for company, candles down the whole length of the long table, wine in glass so thin you could see the light bend through it, and in the kitchen passage, standing, because there was no chair for her and never had been, the kitchen maid ate from the one chipped plate the house kept back for her. The blue one, the one with the crack running through the glaze like a hair caught under ice. She did not flinch. Understand that. A girl given the worst of everything, in front of everyone, and she did not so much as colour. She counted. Later, when the meat had gone round and the men were loud, the nephew rose. Julian Thorne. Golden, they called him, and he liked the word. He crossed the hall with his glass full to the brim, and he stood over her where she waited by the sideboard, and he tipped the claret down her apron. Slow, on purpose. A long red stain from her collar to her hem, spreading like a wound. "Kneel and mop, girl," he said, so the whole table could hear. "Try not to think. It doesn't suit you." And the table laughed. 30 faces, laughing in the candlelight. Now, here is what none of them knew. Not the nephew, not the steward, not one of those 30 laughing mouths. The kitchen maid they mocked, the one they swore couldn't sign her own name, had been writing something down for 14 months. A name. A date. An object. Every single time one of them stole from a dying man's house, she wrote it down. 14 months of it, kept in the dark, kept in silence. And she was almost finished. If you have ever been treated as invisible by the very people you waited upon, if you have ever stood in a room and been counted as furniture by the ones you served with your own 2 hands, then this story is for you. Before we go on, do this one small thing. Subscribe to the channel so you don't lose the rest of this. And in the comments, tell me the town you're watching from tonight. I want to see how far Ravensmere travels. Leave the name of your city below and then come straight back, because I promise you, you will want to see how this ends. Now let me take you back. Let me start it properly and slow and tell you how a 9-year-old orphan came to that cold house in the North Riding and how she learned the one thing that would undo them all. Prudence Sowerby came to Ravensmere Hall, a 9-year-old orphan, in the winter of the year the beck froze solid. Her people were gone. A fever had taken the mother, and the father, the year before that, drowned crossing to the far pasture in the dark. There was an aunt in Thirsk who would not have her, and a workhouse in Northallerton that would, and it was on the road between those 2 hard places that the mistress of Ravensmere found her. Lady Thorne was riding home slow in the closed carriage, and she saw a child sitting on a milestone with her bundle in her lap and her boots gone through at the toe. Most would have looked away. Lady Thorne knocked on the roof and had the carriage stopped. They had no daughters at home, the Thornes. There had been a girl once, grown and married, and gone off to the wrong sort of man, and that was a grief no one spoke of at table. So the great house was quiet. Too quiet for a woman with a warm heart and long Yorkshire winters to fill. She took the child in, not as a daughter, the world does not bend that far, and Prue never once mistook her place, but not as nothing, either. Lady Thorne taught her letters. She did it to pass the time. That was all it ever was, to her. On the black afternoons when the light died at 3 and the wind came off the moor and rattled every window in the house, the 2 of them sat by the still-room fire, and the mistress made shapes on a slate, and the child copied them. A, and then B. Then small words. Then long ones. Then, before either of them quite marked it, the girl was reading the receipts in the household books, reading the labels on the physic bottles, reading the psalms aloud on a Sunday in a clear, steady voice, while Lady Thorne closed her eyes and listened. "You've a quick hand, Prudence," the old woman told her once. "Quicker than mine. Keep it to yourself, mind. A servant who reads makes the other servants nervous." so she kept it to herself. It was a small game between the two of them, and then it was a secret, and then Lady Thorne died in her sleep one April, and it was only a secret, kept by one. Sir Edmund kept his kindness after his wife was gone. Give the man that. He was a hard master to the men and a fair one, and he had no soft words for anybody, but he never once let the kitchen maid want for bread or boots or a fire in her attic in the cold. He would nod to her on the stairs. That was much from him. Once, when she was ill with the quinsy and thought little of her own life, he sent his own physician up the back stairs to see to her, and paid him and said nothing of it after. Then, 14 months before the night I have told you of, the apoplexy took him. It came all at once, at his own breakfast table, with the letters still unopened by his plate. One side of him went slack and still, from the brow to the foot. The speech went entirely. They carried him up to his great bed, and the physician came from York and shook his head. And the word went round the house, and then round the parish, that the Master of Ravensmere was as good as gone. His mind was fled, they said, a body in a chair by a window, breathing and nothing more. And with that the house changed hands. Not by any will, not by any law, no one had died. But a house needs a head, and where the head cannot speak, someone will speak for it. That someone was Mr. Crowle. Crowle was the house steward. He had been in the family's service 30 years and never risen higher than he thought he deserved, and now, at last, the deserving had come. He held the keys. He held the household books. He paid the tradesmen and collected the rents and stood between the estate and the world, and there was no one left above him who could read a column of figures and say him nay. No one they knew of. Because Prue was still there, in the kitchen where she had always been, warming the master's broth twice a day because no one else bothered to warm it, carrying it up the back stairs and spooning it past his still lips, wiping his chin, sitting with him a while when the work allowed. Invisible, a kitchen maid, of no account, who could not, everyone was quite sure, so much as sign her own name. They ate off the silver, she ate from the chipped blue plate, and in the beginning that was the whole of the wrong done to her, and she bore it as she bore the cold, because she had been taught that silent duty was its own kind of shield. That if she kept faith and kept quiet and did her work, the trouble would pass over her head like weather. She was wrong about that. But it took her a while to learn it. Let me show you how she learned. It began with the rents. It was the still-room book that first caught her eye, the household ledger, kept on the shelf by the door where it had always lived, where any maid might dust it without a thought. Crowle wrote in it of an evening, and one evening, reaching past it for the beeswax, Prue saw that a figure had been changed. She knew that book. She had dusted it 1,000 times, and more than dusted it, for years she had read it, quietly, the way she read everything. Because Lady Thorne had made a reader of her, and a reader cannot help but read. She knew the hand the old accounts were kept in, and she knew, the moment she looked, that a 7 had been made into a 9, and a line of rents that should have run to one sum now ran to another, smaller sum, and the difference, some pounds, not many the first time, had simply gone. Skimmed, a little off the top of the Michaelmas rents, and the book altered to hide the little. She said nothing. Of course she said nothing. Who would she say it to? Crowle was the house, but that night, up in her cold attic, by the light of a stub of candle she was not supposed to have, Prudence Sowerby did a thing she would do for 14 months after. She wrote it down. She had a scrap of oilcloth, the kind used to wrap a cheese, and inside it a few leaves of paper she had saved, and a pencil worn to the length of her thumb. And on the first leaf she wrote the date, and the word rents, and the sum that was missing, and one word more, Crowle. Then she wrapped the oilcloth tight and buried it deep in the flour bin, down where no hand went but hers, because she was the one who baked. That was the first entry. She did not yet know it was the first of anything. She thought, that night, that she was only easing her own mind, setting down the truth somewhere so that at least one true account existed in the world, even if no one ever read it. She thought of it as keeping faith. With the mistress who taught her the letters, with the master lying speechless above her. Then came the spoon. It was an apostle spoon, silver, one of a set of 12 that had been in the family since before anyone could say. Old Lady Thorne had loved them. They were kept in a baize-lined box in the dining-room press, and they were counted, in the ordinary way of a great house, and Prue knew the count, because she had polished them Saint's Day after Saint's Day. One morning there were 11. No one raised it, no one so much as noticed, or if they noticed they thought better of it. But Prue noticed, and Prue knew who had been in the dining-room the night before with the press key in his pocket, because she had seen Kroll take the key from the housekeeper's board and not put it back till morning. So she wrote it down. The date, the apostle spoon, the 12th one, the one struck with St. Jude. And the name. That is the thing about a small theft. It tells the thief he can. The spoon told Kroll he could, and once the steward could, the word went out among the family, quiet and unspoken, the way rot travels through a beam, that Ravensmere was open, that the master was gone in his mind and would never know, and the heir not yet named, and the house standing full of good things, with no one to guard them but a steward who had learned to help himself. They came like crows to a field. Aunt Sybil Marsh came in her black bombazine and her Christian face. She was some cousin of the late Lady Thorne, poor and proud and forever hard done by, and she came to Ravensmere to sit with the invalid, she said, out of family feeling. She sat with him an hour. And when she left the sick room, the garnet brooch was gone. It had been the mistress's own, a dark cluster of garnets set in worked gold, kept in the little cabinet by the master's bed, where all his wife's small treasures still lay, because he had never let them be moved. Prue knew that brooch. She had seen it 100 times at the old lady's throat. And she saw, that afternoon, Aunt Sybil come down the stairs with her reticule held close and a high colour in her genteel cheek, and she saw, next morning, that the cabinet by the bed stood short one dark red brooch. There was a young maid who saw it too, Bessie, the between maid, a slip of a girl of 14, who had been laying the fire in the passage and had seen Aunt Sybil's hand come out of that cabinet. Bessie was fool enough, young enough, to say so. To say it out loud to the housekeeper that she'd seen the lady take a thing that wasn't hers. Bessie was gone by the end of the week. Dismissed, no character given. Turned out on the road with her box, for insolence, they said, for telling tales above her station. And the whole house understood the lesson of it, and the whole house held its tongue. Prue held her tongue too. But that night she wrote it all down. The date. The garnet brooch. The cabinet by the bed. Sybil Marsh. And beneath it, smaller, because it mattered, Bessie turned off to keep her quiet. She did not forget the girl. She wrote her in, so that one day the account would show not only what was taken, but what was done to those who spoke. Then Cousin Rupert came for the plate and the cellar. Rupert Thorne was a big, soft, ruinous young man with debts in 3 towns, and he did not trouble to be quiet about it, because by then no one troubled to be quiet about anything. He came with a cart. He came in the daylight, before the servants, and he had the good plate down from the dining-room press and into straw-lined boxes, the epergne, the candlesticks, the salvers, the things that had stood on that long table since Ravensmere was raised, and he had the cellar emptied of the master's best. The old port and the hock and the brandy laid down the year the master was wed. He carried it off in front of the footmen and dared them with his eyes to say a word. They said no word. Prue, coming through with the master's broth, saw the last of it going out. The cart in the yard. The straw. Rupert with a bottle already open in his fist, drinking as he loaded. She stood in the passage with the warm bowl in her hands and watched the plate of 100 years go out the door, and she went up, and she fed Sir Edmund his broth, spoon by spoon, and then she came down, and she wrote it in the oilcloth book, the date, the plate, the cellar, Rupert Thorne. 4 names now in her small clear hand, down in the flour bin in the dark, and she still thought, even then, that the writing was all she could do, that it was a private thing, a keeping of faith, a truth set down for no eyes. She did not yet see it as a weapon. She saw it as a grave marker. Here lies what was Ravensmere, and here is who took it. Then, one October night, she learned that the crows were not content with the spoons and the plate. They were coming for the whole house. And that changed everything. She was on the back stairs after 11, going up with a warming pan, and she heard voices in the little book room where Kroll kept the accounts. 2 voices, and because the door stood an inch open, and because a servant on the back stairs is a shadow that no one counts, she stopped, and she stood, and she listened. One voice was Julian Thorne's, the nephew, the golden one. The other she did not know at first, a dry, careful lawyer's voice, but before the night was out she had the name from Julian's own mouth. Petch, Mr. Petch, a solicitor out of Ripon, of the sort that will do any work for a fee and ask no questions of his conscience. And this is what she heard them say: that Sir Edmund's mind was gone past mending, and everyone knew it, and no court would doubt it. That a man in that state could be declared incapable, unfit to govern his own affairs, and the governing of them passed to another. To a near relation, say, a devoted nephew who had given up so much to nurse his poor uncle. That the true heir, whoever the old man might once have meant it to be, need never come into it at all. And there was a deed. Petch had it drawing up, a deed of transfer, signing over the whole of Ravensmere, the hall, the land, the farms, the whole estate, to Julian Thorne. It wanted only the master's signature, and the master could not hold a pen. That needn't stop us, said the dry voice. A hand can be guided, a mark can be made, and if a mark won't serve, why, a signature can be supplied. I have supplied a good many in my time. With 2 witnesses of the family to swear they saw the old man sign willingly, no soul on earth will look behind it. When? Said Julian. Michaelmas, said Petch. You keep the feast, as the family always has. 30 at the table, the whole connection, all of them witnesses to how tenderly you keep your uncle, and in among it, quiet, the thing is signed and sealed and witnessed, and by morning Ravensmere is yours in law, and let the granddaughter squeak from Leeds all she likes. The granddaughter. That was the first Prue heard of her, Miss Alice Thorne, the daughter of that daughter who had married the wrong man and been struck from the family and never named at table. Living poor in Leeds, Julian said, with her mill clerk husband, not knowing her grandfather lived yet, nor that his house was being stripped and signed away over his silent head. The true heir, banished and unaware and about to be robbed of everything by a forged deed she would never even see drawn up. Prue stood on the dark stair and did the sum in her head, the way Lady Thorne had taught her. The rents, the spoon, the bruch, the plate and the cellar, and now the estate itself. She had a figure by then, near enough she had been keeping it, of what had already gone out of the house in coin and goods. £4,200. £4,200 gone from a dying man's house, and his own blood plotting in the bookroom to take the last stone of it before he was cold. She went up the rest of the stairs very quietly. She warmed the master's bed. She looked at his still face on the pillow, the one side of it fallen, the eye above it open and fixed on the ceiling, and she thought, as everyone thought, there is no one home behind that face. There is no one to protect but a body. She was wrong about that too. But she did not know it yet. She went down and she wrote it all in the oilcloth book. Julian, Petch, the forged deed, Michaelmas, the true heir in Leeds. And under it, in a hand that shook only a little, the sum 4,200 gone before this. And still, this is the part you must understand about her, the thing that is either her great weakness or the seed of everything. Still she thought her duty was to write, and wait, and keep faith, and hope that God or law or the turning of the year would set it right without her having to lift her invisible head. She had been taught that silence was a shield. She held to it a little longer. It took the claret to teach her that silence is not always a shield. Sometimes silence is just the thing that lets the thieves keep working. You know the night already. I began there, but now you know what stood behind it, and I want you to see it again, the way she saw it, with 14 months of the oilcloth book behind her eyes. The Michaelmas feast. Come round. 30 at the long table, the whole connection, exactly as Petch had planned it, every laughing witness assembled to swear how tenderly Julian kept his uncle. The good things they ate off were the last good things. The silver Rupert hadn't carted off, the glass, the gold-rimmed plates. Sir Edmund was not at the table. Sir Edmund lay upstairs in the dark, where they wanted him till the moment they should need his hand, and Prue waited on them all, carried the dishes, filled the glasses, moved among them like a shadow, with a stain already starting on her apron, invisible, counted for nothing, which was exactly why they spoke so freely over their wine of the poor mad master above, and the sad necessity of a strong hand on the estate, and dear Julian's sacrifice. Then Julian rose with his full glass and crossed to her, and tipped the claret down her front, slow, from collar to hem. "Kneel and mop, girl, try not to think. It doesn't suit you." The table laughed, and through the laughing he said the other thing, the thing that was meant to be the cruelest and turned out to be the key that unlocked the whole of what came after. He said it to the table, jerking his chin at her where she knelt on the flags with the cloth in her hands, the red soaking cold through her knees. Can't even sign her own name, this one. Can you, girl? Make your mark, that's your lot. A cross in the register, like her mother before her, God rest whatever she was. And to the table, grandly, that's the trouble with the lower sort. No letters. Nothing up here at all. He tapped his own golden temple, and the 30 laughed again. She knelt on the wet flags and she mopped his wine, and she did not answer, and something in her went very quiet and very still. Not broken. The opposite of broken. You know that stillness. It is the stillness of a thing finally decided. 30 faces had laughed. She looked up once, from the floor, and she counted them, the way she counted everything. She marked the faces, she would want them again. Every one of these that laughed, she thought, is going to be sitting at this same table on the day the account is read, and they are going to hear it read to their faces. Not one of them will be able to say they did not know. Something small broke that night, as well as something in her deciding. The chipped blue plate, her plate, kept back for her in the passage, got knocked in the clearing up, and cracked clean across the old crack, so a shard came away in her hand. A curved blue piece the size of a thumb. She did not throw it in the bin, she wiped it, and she put it in her apron pocket, next to nothing at all, and she kept it. I do not fully know why she kept it. I think she wanted a hard, cold thing to hold in her fist in the days to come, to remind her what she had decided on the floor with the wine soaking through her skirts. That was the last straw. But a last straw does not tell you what to do. It only tells you that you must do something. What she did next, that came from upstairs. That came from the master. She went up to him late that night, after the guests were bedded and the house gone dark, because she always went up last thing to see him settled, feast or no feast. She was tired to her bones, and her skirt was still stiff with dried wine. She sat by his bed in the one candle, and she took his good hand, the living one, the way she did. And she told him. She did not mean to. It came out of her in the dark, low, the whole of it, the rents and the spoon and the brook and pour turned off Bessie and Rupert's cart, and the deed, and Michaelmas and the granddaughter in Leeds, who did not even know he lived. £4,200, she told his still face. And now the house itself, sir, they mean to take the house. She was not saying it because she thought he heard. She was saying it because there was no one else on this earth she could say it to, and the words had grown too heavy to carry alone, and his hand closed on hers. Not a twitch, not the loose flutter of a sleeping man, a grip, slow and deliberate and hard, his fingers folding down over hers and pressing, once, twice, holding on. She looked up at his face, and the candle was between them, and the one good eye was open, and it was not fixed on the ceiling now. It was on her. It was looking at her. And as she watched, unable to breathe, that eye went from her face down to her apron pocket, to the very pocket where the oilcloth book was folded away, because she had brought it up, meaning to add the night's entry by his bed. And back up to her face again, down to the pocket, up to her eyes. He knew. Behind that fallen, silent, written-off face, Sir Edmund Thorne knew everything. Had known, perhaps, all along. 14 months of watching them rob him blind, trapped inside a body that would not carry his voice, screaming with no throat, and now here at last was one person in his house who had seen it too, and set it down, and could read it back to him. His hand pressed hers. Once more, as hard as the ruined side of him would let him press, and she understood it as plainly as if he had spoken, as plainly as any word Lady Thorne had ever chalked on the slate. Do something. She sat there a long time in the dark with the old man's hand in hers, and the shard of blue plate cold in her pocket against the oilcloth book, and she felt the last of the girl who thought silence was a shield go quietly out of her. Silence had not shielded the master, it had only given the thieves the dark to work in. Duty was not sitting still and keeping faith and hoping. Not any more. Duty was the account in her pocket, and the 30 faces that had laughed, and 11 miles of cold road she had not yet walked, and a name she must reach in Leeds before Michaelmas closed the door forever. She leaned close to his ear, and she made him a promise. Lo, the way you make a promise you mean to die keeping. They think I can't write my name, sir, she whispered. I'm going to let them go on thinking it. Right up until the last. His hand pressed hers. The candle burned down between them. And somewhere below in the dark house, the forged deed lay waiting in Mr. Petch's satchel, and Michaelmas was already counting itself down, day by day, toward the long table and the 30 candles and the account that had never once, in 14 silent months, been read aloud. She did not yet know if her letters would reach York in time. She did not yet know the road she would walk before dawn, nor who would answer, nor whether the answer would come before the pen touched the wax. But she knew now what she was. Not furniture, not a mark in a register. The one soul in Ravensmere who could read the whole account, and, when the hour came, read it out. The trouble was, she was not the only one who had begun to feel that something in the house had changed. Down in his bookroom, Kroll had started to count his lies over, and to wonder, of late, why the still room book felt as though other hands had touched it. And a steward who begins to feel watched is a dangerous thing to a girl with a secret buried in the flower. The letters went out before the sun did. Prue walked 11 miles of cold road that morning, out past cold Aldby, while the whole house still slept off the feast. Frost lay on the hedges, her breath went before her in the dark. She had 2 letters buttoned inside her bodice, against her skin, where no one could feel them but her. One was for Mr. Ashby, the old family solicitor in York, who had drawn up Sir Edmund's true will years ago, and had not been sent for since the master fell. The other was for Miss Alice Thorne, in Leeds, who did not know her grandfather still lived. She wrote them both plain. She named the thefts. She named the dates. She named the deed that Petch meant to forge at Michaelmas, and she named the sum already gone. £4,200 in rents and plate carried out of a dying man's house by the people who called themselves his family. She posted them at the receiving office before the town was properly awake, and she walked the 11 miles back, and she was scrubbing the passage floor by the time Kroll came down for his tea. He looked at her the way he looked at all the furniture. She kept her eyes on the stone. Her boots were still wet inside. She did not let it show. That was the day the waiting began, and the waiting was the hardest work she had ever done, because now she had to be, every hour, exactly the girl they thought she was. Slow, silent, grateful for the chipped blue plate. She smiled when Kroll barked at her. She curtsied when Julian passed her in the hall without seeing her. She carried Sir Edmund his warmed broth twice a day and spooned it past his still lips, and only when the door was shut did she lean to his ear and tell him what she had done, and feel his hand close over her wrist. He knew. She was sure of it now. His eyes followed the oilcloth book when she drew it from her apron. His fingers pressed, once for yes, and she had taught herself to read that one small pressure the way Lady Thorne had once taught her to read her letters. But a house where one person has begun to move is a house where the still ones start to feel the draught. Kroll felt it first. He came into the kitchen on the third day, unannounced, and stood in the middle of the flags with his ring of keys in his fist. Prue was at the range. She did not turn too quick. She stirred the pot as if a steward standing over her were the most ordinary thing in the world. "Someone's been at my bookroom," he said. "Sir?" The still-room ledger's been shifted. His voice was soft, and soft was worse than loud, from Kroll. Sat crooked on the shelf. "I know how I leave a thing. I leave it square." Prue's heart went hard against her ribs. The oilcloth book was not in the still room. She had moved it days ago, out of the flower bin, where it had lived 14 months, and into the great chapel Bible on its stand in the cold family pew, laid flat inside the Book of Kings, where no thief in this house would ever think to look, because not one of them had opened a Bible since the mistress died. But the still-room ledger, the ordinary one, the household one, that she had touched, she had copied a figure from it. She had set it back a hair's breadth wrong. "I dusted in there Tuesday, Miss Kroll," she said. "I'll have knocked it. I'm sorry, sir. I'll not touch your shelves again." He looked at her a long moment. She kept her face the face of a girl who dusts and knows nothing. Plain, steady, a little afraid of him, which was true, and which he liked. "See you don't," he said at last. And he went out, and she heard his keys go jingling down the passage, and she let her breath out slow over the pot and found her hands were shaking. That was the first cycle. She had come within a shelf's width of the whole thing, and she had talked her way clear on a lie about dusting. Relief tasted like cold iron in her mouth. The second thing that happened, she had not dared to hope for. Bessie came back. Bessie, the between maid of 14, who had seen Aunt Sybil Marsh lift the garnet brooch from the cabinet by the master's bed, and who had said so out loud to the housekeeper, and who had been turned off the very next morning without a character, sent walking down the drive with her box on her shoulder and nowhere to go, so that no one would believe a word out of her again. Prue had thought her lost for good. But she came to the kitchen door one evening at dusk, thin and chapped, working now at a farm 3 miles off. And she had come, she said, because she could not stop thinking on it. On the master, lying up there, on being called a liar for telling the truth. Prue brought her in and sat her by the fire and gave her bread. And then she did a thing she had never done in front of a living soul. She took a scrap of paper and a pen, and she said, "Bessie, what you saw. Tell it to me slow. The day, if you know it, where the lady stood. What her hand did." Bessie stared. "You're writing," she whispered. "Prue, you can write." "I can," said Prue. "And I've been writing you all down for 14 months. Now tell me true, and put your mark to it, and you'll not be a liar to anybody ever again," Bessie told her. The date. The cabinet. Sybil's gloved hand and the brooch going into the little beaded reticule she never set down. And at the bottom, where Prue had written it fair, Bessie made her cross, careful, with her tongue between her teeth. 2 witnesses now, where there had been 1. Prue folded the paper into the Bible with the rest. The third thing was the worst, and it came from Julian's own impatience. She was clearing the long table after the family's dinner when she heard it, through the door of the little morning room where Julian and Petch took their brandy. Julian did not trouble to lower his voice. Why would he? The only ears near the door belonged to a kitchen maid, and a kitchen maid was a chair. "I'll not wait past Michaelmas," Julian was saying. "The old man could linger a year in that state, and every month he lingers, Ashby in York might take it into his head to come sniffing. We do it at the feast, wheel him down. Prop him at the head of his own table like the ghost he is. You bring the deed, Petch. His hand goes round the pen, mine goes round his, and it's witnessed by 30 of the county before the pudding's cold. Let anyone try to unpick a thing signed in front of 30 guests." Petch's dry little voice, and if he resists, they do sometimes, these cases. A jerk of the hand. "He hasn't moved in 14 months, Julian said. He's a turnip in a nightshirt. He'll sign, because I'll make his hand sign. And the beauty of it, everyone at that table will swear they watched Sir Edmund Thorne put his own name to it, willing, at his own feast." Prue stood on the other side of the door with a stack of plates in her arms and did not breathe. The signing was moved. To the feast. To the very table. The deed would be witnessed and sealed in front of the same 30 faces that had laughed at her, in the same room, by candlelight, and there would be no undoing it after, no court in England able to unpick a will signed before half the county. Which meant she had now 1 night and 1 dinner. And Ashby had not answered. And Alice had not answered, and every mile of that cold road she had walked might have led nowhere at all. She carried the plates down to the scullery. She set them in the water. She did not let one of them chip. And she thought, then it will have to be me. If no one comes, it will have to be me. And the book, and 30 candles, and my own voice that they all swear cannot read. The night before Michaelmas, Kroll nearly ended it. She had gone up the back stair with the master's evening broth, and coming down again she met him on the half landing, and he had a paper in his hand. A torn corner of paper. Foolscap, and on it, in a small, close hand that was unmistakably her own, part of a copied line, the deed's own words, that she had set down to have them exact. She had thought she'd burned every scrap of the copy. She had missed a corner. Kroll held it up between 2 fingers. "What?" he said, very quiet now. "Is this?" The stair was dark. His face was above the candle and half in shadow. Prue looked at the paper, and she looked at him, and in the space of one breath she made herself into the girl he needed her to be. The girl who could not possibly have written it, because the girl who could not write her own name could not have written anything at all. "Twist of paper from the firebox, sir," she said, and made her voice small and stupid. "For lighting the master's candle. I pick 'em out the grate. There's writing on all of 'em, sir. It's the old letters and such that get burned. I can't read what's on 'em, can I? It's just to catch the flame." She held out her hand for it, dull, patient, a servant asking back a spill of waste paper. He did not give it to her. He looked from the paper to her face and back, and she stood there and let him look, and put nothing in her eyes but tiredness and the cold, and after a long while the corner of his mouth moved, and he said, "No, you can't read it." "Can you?" Not a question. A thing he was reassuring himself of. He crumpled the corner in his fist. "Get to your bed." She got to her bed. She lay in the dark of the maid's garret, and she shook, all over, quietly for a long time. She had been a hare from the assizes herself. A servant caught forging the master's papers, they would not have troubled to hear her. But he had let her go, because he could not make himself believe that the plate she ate from could also hold a mind. His certainty was the wall she was hiding behind. It had nearly fallen. It had held. She did not sleep. She lay listening to the house, and at some black hour she rose and went down in her shift and bare feet, cold flags under her soles, and she took the oilcloth book out of the chapel Bible and held it against her chest in the dark, and she read it over by the little grey window light, though she knew every line by heart, every name, every date, every object, 14 months of it, and she waited for the morning that would either bring a carriage from York or bring nothing at all. Michaelmas came grey and gold. By evening the hall was lit up as it had not been since the mistress died. 30 at the long table, 30 in their county silks and their good black coats, 30 faces down the length of the white cloth, and every one of them eating off thorn silver by the light of 30 candles. At the head of the table sat Sir Edmund Thorne, wheeled down and propped in his chair, a rug over his knees, his head held up by a cushion, his eyes open and fixed and giving nothing away, and beside his place, laid ready on the cloth, a single sheet of parchment weighted flat, and an inkstand, and a pen, and, half drawn from Mr. Petch's satchel by the master's elbow, a fold of paper Prue knew word for word. She came in to serve. She came in the way she always came in, quiet, in her apron, invisible, carrying the great tureen. And no one looked at her, because no one ever looked at her, and that was the last mistake the room would make. Julian rose, glass in hand, golden and easy, and the table hushed for him. "Friends," he said, "you honour my uncle's house tonight. You know his affliction. You know he cannot speak, but his wishes are clear and known to me, and tonight, before you all that you may witness it, my uncle sets his affairs in order and his estate into hands that will keep it." He smiled down the candles. "Eat first. We'll not sign on an empty stomach." There was a warm murmur of approval. And Prue began to serve the soup. She served from the left, as she had been taught. She set the first plate before Mr. Crowle, who sat near the head as stewards did, and she leaned in with the ladle, and she said, low and level, meant for him and no further, the Michaelmas rents came to £640, Mr. Crowle. You entered 490 in the still-room book. I have both figures. I have the day you altered it, and the pen you did it with, and the 12th apostle spoon, St. Jude, that you took out of the dining-room press the same week and never put back. Crowle's spoon stopped halfway to the soup. He looked up at her. For the first time in 14 months, Mr. Crowle looked at her, properly, full in the face, and what he saw there was not furniture. His colour went. He opened his mouth and shut it. "What did you say?" He got out, but she had already moved on down the table, smooth, the good servant, the invisible girl, to the next place. She set the next plate before Aunt Sybil Marsh and leaned in with the ladle. "The garnet brooch, ma'am," Prue said softly. "The late mistress's. You took it from the cabinet by the master's bed, the 9th of the month, in the afternoon, into the little beaded bag you have there on your wrist. Bessie saw you. Bessie, that you had turned off without a character so she'd not be believed. She's put her name to it now. And so have I." Sybil Marsh gave a little laugh, high and quick, the laugh of a genteel woman brushing off an impertinence. But her gloved hand had gone, without her willing it, to the beaded reticule in her lap, and closed on it, and the whole table saw the hand move. Prue served on. Fish now. She set the plate before cousin Rupert Thorne, big and red, and already half in his cups. The silver plate went out on a cart the 12th. "Mr. Rupert," she said, in daylight. 2 hampers and the cellar besides, the master's port that his father laid down the year the beck froze. I counted the bottles out of the rack myself. I have the number. I have the day. The carter can be found. Rupert twisted round in his chair. Here, what's this girl saying? Who let this girl? But the woman beside him had gone still and pale, and down the table the murmur had changed its note entirely, and Julian was frowning now, half risen, feeling the evening slip and not yet seeing how. And Prue came at last to Mr. Petch and set his plate before him, and leaned in close over the crooked little solicitor with his satchel at his elbow, and she said, "The deed of transfer, sir. I, Edmund Thorne, being of sound mind, do freely convey the whole of my estate, real and personal, unto my nephew Julian Thorne, his heirs and assigns for ever." She said it word for word, without a pause, without a stumble, the whole opening of it, exact as the parchment waited flat not 2 feet from his hand. "I copied it out 3 nights ago, Mr. Petch, in your own words. Because you left the satchel in the steward's room, and a chair can't read, can it? So no one thought to lock it." Petch's dry face went the colour of the tablecloth, and into the middle of that silence 30 guests, spoons down, candles burning, no one eating now. Prudence Sowerby did the thing she had waited 14 months to do. She reached into her apron, she drew out the oilcloth book, and she laid it open, flat, on the white cloth between the candles, in the very centre of the long table, where every one of the 30 could see the small close writing filling it page on page, and she smoothed it once with her hand. Julian was on his feet. "What is the meaning of, Crowle? Get this creature out of your uncle's," Prue said. And her voice was not small now. It carried, clear, the whole length of the table, into every corner of the bright shocked room. "It's your uncle's house yet, sir, and you were right about me. You said it at this same table, 3 weeks gone, when you poured your wine on me and made me kneel and mop it up." And 30 people laughed. She looked down the candles at the 30 faces, and not one of them was laughing now. "You said the kitchen maid never learned her letters." She turned back to Julian, and she held his eyes, and she said it quiet and level and clear. "You were right, sir. The kitchen maid never did learn her letters. So I learned yours." And the great doors at the end of the hall opened. Mr. Ashby came in first, old, upright, in his travelling black, with the parish constable at his shoulder in his heavy coat, and behind them, in a plain grey cloak, come 11 miles out of Leeds in a hired trap, a young woman with a tired face and her grandmother's steady eyes. Miss Alice Thorne. Come home, and not knowing yet, until she stepped into the candlelight and saw the old man in the wheeled chair at the head of the table, that her grandfather was alive. The room came apart in noise. Chairs scraped. Someone cried out. Julian shouted for the constable to remove the lot of them, and the constable did not move. Ashby walked the length of the table, unhurried, and he picked up the parchment from beside Sir Edmund's plate, and he read it, and he set it down again. "This deed," said Mr. Ashby, and his old voice cut the noise like a blade, "purports to convey the whole Thorne estate of a man these papers call of sound mind to Mr. Julian Thorne. It is a forgery. I drew Sir Edmund's true will 11 years ago. This is not his hand, and no such conveyance was ever instructed. He laid his fingers on the oilcloth book. This account, kept day by day these 14 months, I have read the copy this young woman posted to me in York. I have checked it against the rent rolls this very afternoon. It is the only true and honest account of this house that exists. Every figure in it stands." He turned to Sir Edmund. "Gently," he asked, "Edmund, old friend. Can you hear me?" And every soul in that room watched the still old man in the chair. For a long moment nothing. And then Sir Edmund Thorne's hand, the hand that had not, they all swore, moved in 14 months, lifted from the rug across his knees. Slow, trembling, it travelled to the inkstand. Prue was at his side in an instant, and she set the pen between his fingers, and closed her own hand warm around his to steady it, the way she had steadied the broth spoon 1,000 times, and Sir Edmund wrote, slow and clear and legible, one letter at a time, on the honest paper Ashby laid before him, his own name, Edmund Thorne, and beside it, in the same shaking hand, with Prue's hand round his, he wrote one word more. Alice. He set the pen down. He lifted his eyes, and they were not empty, they had never been empty, they were bright and wet and full of a mind that had watched everything from behind a locked door for 14 months, and he found his granddaughter's face across the candles, and he held it. Then it broke over each of them in turn, the way she had served them. Dish by dish. Kroll stood up so fast his chair went over backward. He began to bluster that the girl was mad, that the figures were nothing, that a steward's book was a steward's own affair, and Ashby simply opened the still-room ledger to the altered page and laid it beside the oilcloth book. The false figure and the true one side by side in the candlelight, and the bluster ran down out of Kroll like water out of a cracked jug, down and down, until the last of it was a whisper, and then nothing at all, and he sat down in the overturned chair that was not there, and near went to the floor. Aunt Sybil Marsh was still laughing her high little laugh, still saying it was absurd, it was insolence, she would not be spoken to so by a servant, until the constable stepped to her chair and asked, very civil, if the lady would open her reticule, and she clutched it, and would not, and clutched it, and the whole table watched her clutch it, and that was answer enough, and when at last it was drawn from her fingers and opened, the garnet brooch lay inside on the beaded silk, the mistress's brooch, red as a drop of blood in the candle shine. And the laugh curdled on Sybil's face, and did not come again. Cousin Rupert did not wait to be named twice. He bolted, shoved back his chair, and made for the doors in a lumbering panic, and met the second constable coming in at them, and was turned, red and sweating and suddenly sober, back into the bright room where 30 people watched him be afraid. Mr. Petch never said a word in his own defence. He could not. Ashby set the forged deed before him and laid one finger on the witnessing line, and it was Petch's own signature there, dry and small and unmistakable, damning him in his own hand, and the little solicitor looked at it and seemed to fold in on himself, and was quiet, and Julian Thorne stood alone at the head of a table that was no longer his, before 30 faces that had laughed with him 3 weeks gone and would never laugh with him again, and he had nothing. No line, no charm, no easy golden word. He opened his mouth, and the room waited, and nothing came out of it. The silence he had handed to a kitchen maid, kneel and mop. Girl, try not to think. It doesn't suit you. That same silence had come all the way back down the long table and settled over him, and it fit him, and he wore it, and there was not a thing in the world he could say. Prue did not gloat. She had thought, on the cold road, that she might. She found in the event that she only felt tired and clean, the way you feel when a long fever breaks. She went to Sir Edmund, and she wiped a little ink from his fingers with the corner of her apron, and she leaned to his ear as she had 1,000 times, and she said, "There, sir. It's read out now. All of it. You can rest." And his hand closed over her wrist. Once, for yes. 6 months on, the beck ran full and quick with the spring, and Ravensmere Hall had windows open to the green. Miss Alice Thorne was mistress of it now, quietly, without fuss, in a plain gown, doing her own accounts at her grandmother's desk, with her mill clerk husband turned steward in Kroll's place, and doing the work honest. The house had lost its held breath. The rooms smelled of beeswax and cut flowers again, and Sir Edmund, who would never walk or speak, sat by the tall south window in the mornings with a rug across his knees and the light on his face, and it was Prue who brought him his broth, warmed proper, and spooned it past his lips, and told him the small news of the day, while his bright eyes followed her about the room. They had given her the still-room keys, and they had given her, because Miss Alice had asked what she would like above anything, and Prue had gone red and not known how to say it, the late Lady Thorne's own writing desk, the small walnut one from the still room, where an orphan of 9 had first been shown how to make her letters to pass the Yorkshire winters. It stood now in Prue's own little room, and there were paper and ink in it, and no one in that house would ever again be surprised to learn that Prudence Sowerby could write. The chipped blue plate had not been thrown away. Prue had asked for that too. She had taken the cracked blue plate they had handed her all those years while the family dined on silver, and the shard of it that had cracked further the night the claret came down, and she had carried them to the tinker in Cold Aldby, and had them mended, the shard set back, and a single tin rivet driven through to hold it. And on fine mornings she took her tea out to the kitchen step and drank it from that plate, in the first grey light, before the house woke, with the beck running below and the frost gone off the hedges. The rest of them had scattered to what they'd earned. Crowell went to the assizes at York, and from there to a cell, and the false figures in his own hand went with him and did the talking. Julian Thorne was gone to the Continent on money he had borrowed against an estate that was never his, and word came he was living thin in some cheap town abroad, and no word came from him at all. Aunt Sybil Marsh wrote 3 times, begging that the garnet brooch be returned to her as a keepsake of her dear cousin, and Miss Alice read the letters kindly and set them by, and did not answer, and the brooch stayed pinned at the throat of the true heir where it belonged. Rupert paid back what the plate had fetched, to the shilling, rather than stand up in a court and be named. And Petch never practised law again. Bessie came back to Ravensmere too, restored, with a character this time, and wages, and Prue taught her letters in the evenings at the walnut desk, the way she had once been taught, to pass the winter. Some accounts are settled quick, with a shout and a blow, and some are kept in silence, a name and a date and an object at a time, in a small close hand, in an oilcloth book buried in the flour, kept and kept and kept, through every insult and every night, until the one day comes that they can be laid open on the white cloth between the candles, and read aloud, at last, to every face that thought no one was keeping count. Prudence Sowerby had been the girl everyone mocked. She turned out to be the only one who could read the whole account. If this story warmed you tonight, stay a while and comment the town you're watching from. I should dearly like to see how far Ravensmere has travelled.